So we're continuing with Unit 7 on the process of America's change from a mostly agrarian, somewhat trade-oriented society to a fully industrialized urban society, Unit 7. Last week we talked about the challenges and motivations to moving into these cities in the Northeast. Now today we're going to talk about what some people refer to as the Gilded Age. Now, gilded is a term that basically means it's shiny on the outside, but decayed and corrupt underneath. And so 7.3 we'll talk about the corrupt part, but now we want to talk about the good things. What was actually good about the changes in America, etc. Here's a quick look at some your vocabulary definitions. You can push pause and get that into your notes. But moving into the shiny part of the industrial age. Probably most of all is the huge change in industries. Maybe the newest, most incredible industry was that of steel. An inventor by the name of Henry Bessemer figured out a process by which you could take iron ore and make it into steel, thus making it stronger, lighter, and longer lasting. Stronger meaning it can hold greater weights. You can think about railroad tracks now made out of steel. Stronger and lightweight, meaning now you could build more vertical buildings. This is going to be the advent of skyscrapers. You can see the world or the United States' first skyscraper there, the Flatiron Building in New York. Up until this point, buildings could only be so many stories high because the brick and mortar that we used to build them got too heavy the higher it went. Now you've got steel. So one of the problems they had in the city, overcrowded. So now you could build vertical. And so steel for bridges, for railroads, for buildings, becomes a huge multi-billion-dollar industry. Oil, the refining of oil, of petroleum. Now at this point, oil that we're talking about is being used for heat, being used for light, and for factories, mostly kerosene, not for automobile oil. We're not there yet. But this will become another billion-dollar industry as people now realize we have another source for power. And then lastly, although we touched this topic in Unit 6, railroads. America is going to be covered by railroads. You know, if you think about American railroads before the Civil War, cook one box of spaghetti and throw it on the floor. That's how many railroads they were. During the age of industrialization and urbanization, with the rise of the Transcontinental Railroad, cook 50 boxes of spaghetti and throw it on the floor. Railroads are everywhere. And you have the advent of towns being built up alongside the railroads to aid in, the transportation. People live close to all of these goods that are being bought and sold on the railroads. Three huge industries. There were many others, but those are probably the big ones. Not just new industries, but new inventions and new innovations. Probably the top of the list was Thomas Edison and his invention of the light bulb. I mean, when you think about it, what's our symbol for a really good idea? We put a light bulb over somebody's head. So that tells you how big a deal it was for Thomas Edison to come up with a light bulb. And it took lots of work. He had to figure out what filament to use to connect the wires for electricity to run through, to burn, and to continue to burn and turn off and turn on, turn off and turn on. And, you can see in his quote, it took him a long time, but he finally figured it out. Thomas Edison was probably the greatest inventor and innovator of his day. We'll talk a lot more about some of his other ideas in a later unit. However, the other thing we want to touch on with Thomas Edison's light bulb is just because you have a light bulb doesn't mean you can use it in your house, because light bulbs need electricity. So not only did he pioneer the light bulb, he helped to pioneer the process of getting electricity into American households. He basically bought and built an amusement park in New York called Luna Park and outfitted it with thousands of electrical lights. Think the craziest Christmas display you've ever seen. And then brought people by the hundreds and thousands. And they all said, wow, this light bulb thing is really cool. Wish we could have one of those in our apartment or house. And so people then began to string electricity throughout the streets and cities of this urbanization process. Of course, that will open the door for all the other electrical products that will come in later years, later decades. The refrigerator, a toaster, heaters, etc. Alexander Graham Bell invents the telephone. It's going to change communication, especially in this age where more and more people live in the city, which requires faster communication as trade is speeding up. Women begin to take jobs that kind of fit their skill set, quote unquote. Typewriters are going to be used, sewing machines, large numbers, and switchboard operators as they began to work the telephones. This is going to be, in some ways, maybe more of a cornerstone for the feminist movement than even some of the early suffragettes like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony pushing for women's rights. You know, nothing gets women rights faster than actual jobs and independence. And then another kind of invention was the creation of underground subways. You know, think about every road that exists on top of a city. Now you got to build them under the city. Really difficult process, creating lots of money and lots of movement. Another shiny, perhaps, aspect of this time period was the explosion of leisure time activities. You know, farmers don't really talk about leisure time. There's no days off. Cows need milking every day. Animals need fed every day. Harvest is a lot of work. And then you go into preparing the fields, and then you're always working. But factory workers have days off. They get off of their shift, etc. And even though Edison's light bulb is going to create the night shift, factories are going to start to work around the clock. People soon start to have leisure time. So what are they going to do? Well, now you have an entire industry built around buying people's leisure time. So they might pay money to go watch a baseball game as a spectator. They might pay to go to an amusement park like Coney Island in New York. They might go to the beaches. Or they might go to a new idea. Frederick Olmsted creates Central Park, this centrally planned 12 blocks of grass and lakes and grass in the middle of the concrete jungle. You know, just the idea that this incredibly pricey real estate could be used just for people to take a walk in with some trees or to sit on the grass and have a picnic. It helps you realize that people were understanding that the ability to get away from work was going to be important. You know, you think about America today, leisure is a multi-billion-dollar industry. You know, whether it's entertainment or working out, whatever it is, people spend lots of money to get away. And this is, to a certain degree, when that really starts to explode in America. Lastly, I want to talk about our captains of industry. You know, to be a captain is a good thing. And America began to realize that there was a few men who had the initiative, the will, the energy, the entrepreneurial spirit and ideas to drive American industry to the top of the world. John Rockefeller becomes the kingpin of Standard Oil. You know, you find oil under rocks, so Rockefeller does oil. Standard Oil was his company, and he is known to a certain degree as the world's first billionaire. Incredible wealth through this process. J.P. Morgan becomes this incredible financial giant. He does a little bit of everything: banking, railroads, finance. At one point, the American government is going to need money, and the captain of industry they go to, J.P. Morgan. You could also talk about Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Commodore, who is known at first for working with steamboats, hence the nickname Commodore, like Commodore Barbosa from Pirates of the Caribbean, but quickly switched over to the new transportation focus of railroads. At one point, Vanderbilt owned 40% of American railroads, and he used that money to not only fund a university, Vanderbilt, the Commodores, but also to build this huge palace that you could see in North Carolina, out near Asheville, Biltmore Estates, this European-looking castle that was built by the Vanderbilt family. And last but not least, we talk about Andrew Carnegie, the ultimate rags to riches story. Scottish immigrant, came to America with nothing, rose to the top of the steel industry, and created a steel industry so great that he was actually able to sell it to J.P. Morgan for $450. So all of these guys were monopolists, seen as great captains of industry. Carnegie was also famous for being one of the first major philanthropists with these captains of industry, giving away thousands and thousands of dollars to libraries, the Carnegie Center for Entertainment, Carnegie Mellon University. Part of it was he began to realize that some of what they had done was cheating, and they'd done some bad things to get this money. One of the things we're going to talk about tomorrow is these captains of industry could be seen as robber barons as they built their financial fortunes on the ruins of the common person. Regardless, some of these men began to realize the power of their wealth and begin to give it away. We also talk about this set of books called Horatio Alger's stories, Rags to Riches, the Luck and Pluck series, that many Americans bought into the idea that they could be like Carnegie. They could come to America with nothing, arrive in Ellis Island, live in a dumbbell tenement, work in a sweatshop, but yet still end up a millionaire like like Andrew Carnegie. And so that's some of the gilded, the good, the shiny of this time period. In 7.3, we'll talk about the corrupt underneath.